It was supposed to be a quiet, uneventful night. I was working my usual shift at a small Chinese takeout place called Golden Dragon. My boss, Mr. Liu, was in the back preparing orders while I handled deliveries. It was nearing the end of my shift when an order came in for a large family meal. Mr. Liu handed me the receipt with the address and phone number scribbled on it. The address was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with, on the outskirts, where the houses were far apart, surrounded by woods. I didn't have GPS on my phone, just an old flip phone, so I had to rely on a printed map we kept in the car. After studying the map for a few minutes, I set off, hoping I wouldn't get lost. The drive was long and eerie. The further I went, the fewer streetlights there were, until eventually I was driving down a pitch-black road surrounded by dense trees. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under my tires. I kept glancing at the map, trying to make sure I was on the right track. Finally, I spotted the street I was looking for, a narrow dirt road with no sign, just a small mailbox leaning to one side. I turned onto the dirt road, driving slowly as my headlights illuminated the overgrown trees and bushes on either side. After what felt like forever, I saw a small, run-down house come into view. The place looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. The paint was peeling, the windows were dark, and the porch sagged under its own weight. There was an old, rusted car parked in the driveway, but no other signs of life. I parked my car and grabbed the bag of food. As I approached the house, I noticed how quiet it was. No crickets, no wind, just an oppressive silence. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time, and after a few moments I heard slow, shuffling footsteps approaching from inside. The door creaked open just a crack, and a man's face appeared in the gap. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with unkempt gray hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to stare right through me. His expression was blank, almost lifeless. Hi, I've got your order," I said, holding up the bag. The man didn't respond right away. He just stood there, staring at me. Finally, in a low, gravelly voice, he said, "Come inside, I'll get the money." I hesitated. We were always told not to go into customers' houses, but something about the way he said it made me feel like I didn't have a choice. Reluctantly, I stepped inside. The air was heavy and smelled of mildew and something else I couldn't quite place, something metallic like rust. The inside of the house was even worse than the outside. The wallpaper was peeling, the furniture was old and mismatched, and the floor creaked with every step. There were strange stains on the walls and ceiling, and the dim light from a single bulb hanging in the hallway barely illuminated the space. "Wait here," the man said, disappearing into another room. I stood there awkwardly, clutching the bag of food, my eyes darting around the room. That's when I noticed something strange, a series of Polaroid photos pinned to the wall. They were all of people, but their faces were scratched out. My stomach turned as I realized some of the photos looked recent. I heard a noise behind me and turned to see a second man standing at the end of the hallway. He was tall and thin, wearing a dirty tank top and jeans. His face was pale, and he was grinning at me in a way that made my skin crawl. He didn't say anything, just stood there, staring and grinning. Is everything okay?" I called out, my voice shaking. The first man reappeared, holding a wad of cash. "You've come to the kitchen," he said, motioning for me to follow him. "I'm fine right here," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The man's expression darkened. "Come to the kitchen," he repeated, more forcefully this time. I took a step back toward the door, my heart pounding. "I'll just leave the food here," I said, setting the bag down on a small table by the door. The tall man at the end of the hallway started walking toward me, his grin widening. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and bolted out the door, slamming it behind me. As I ran to my car, I heard the door creak open again, but I didn't look back. I jumped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and sped down the dirt road as fast as I could. When I finally got back to the restaurant, I told Mr. Liu what had happened. He shook his head and said, I should have trusted my instincts and left as soon as I felt something was off. I couldn't stop thinking about those Polaroids on the wall and the way that second man had grinned at me. I never took another delivery to that part of town again. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I had stepped into that kitchen, or if I hadn't run when I did. I'm a 21-year-old college student living in a small town in Pennsylvania. It's a quiet place for the most part, but like any college town, things get a little rowdy when the semester is in full swing. I work part-time as a pizza delivery driver for a local pizzeria. It's not the most glamorous job, but the tips are decent, and it helps me pay for school. This story happened about a year ago during one of my late-night shifts. I still think about it sometimes, and it sends chills down my spine. It was a Friday night in early October, and I was working the closing shift, which usually ran from 6 p.m. to 1 a.m. The night had been busy, as expected, with orders coming in non-stop. By the time midnight rolled around, I was exhausted and ready to call it a night. But just as I was about to start cleaning up, one last order came in. It was for a house on the outskirts of town, about a 15-minute drive away. I groaned internally but took the order since it was my turn. The address was in a more rural area, where houses were spaced far apart and streetlights were few and far between. I loaded the pizza into my car and set off. The drive was uneventful at first, but as I got closer to the address, the roads became darker and narrower. My GPS led me down a long, winding road surrounded by dense woods. I remember feeling a little uneasy, but I brushed it off as just being tired. When I finally arrived, the house was completely dark. There were no lights on inside or outside, and it looked like no one was home. I double-checked the address on the receipt and confirmed it was correct. I parked my car in the gravel driveway and grabbed the pizza. As I walked up to the front door, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. No crickets, no wind, nothing. Just silence. I knocked on the door and waited. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. I was about to call the number on the receipt when I heard a faint rustling sound coming from the woods behind the house. I froze, my heart starting to race. I told myself it was probably just an animal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I knocked one last time, and when no one answered, I decided to call the customer. The phone rang a few times before going to voicemail. Frustrated, I turned to head back to my car. That's when I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the woods, partially hidden behind a tree. It was too dark to make out any details, but I could tell it was a person. They weren't moving, just standing there watching me. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I tried to act like I hadn't noticed them and walked quickly back to my car. As I reached for the door handle, I heard the sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel behind me. I whipped around and saw the figure walking toward me. Slowly at first, then picking up speed. My adrenaline kicked in, and I jumped into my car, locking the doors just as the person reached the driver's side window. They slammed their hand against the glass, and I got a better look at them. They were wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up and some kind of mask that covered their entire face. I couldn't see their eyes, but I could feel their gaze on me. In their other hand, they were holding what looked like a crowbar. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted. I started the car and threw it into reverse, backing out of the driveway as fast as I could. The person didn't chase me but stood there in the driveway, watching as I sped off. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely keep the car on the road. I didn't stop driving until I was back at the pizzeria. When I got back, I told my manager what had happened. He looked concerned, but didn't seem to know what to do. I didn't call the police because I didn't have much to tell them, just a vague description of a masked person in the middle of nowhere. I finished my shift and went home, but I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing in the driveway, staring at me. I never delivered to that address again, and I've been more cautious about late-night deliveries ever since. I don't know who that person was or what they wanted, but I'm just glad I got out of there before I found out. I used to work as a DoorDash driver to make some extra cash while juggling my college classes. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills. I usually stuck to daytime shifts, but one night I decided to take a few late-night orders since the pay was higher. It was a quiet Tuesday night, and I got an order to pick up from a 24-hour diner and deliver to a house about 15 minutes away. The address was in a more rural area outside of town, but I figured it was just another delivery. After picking up the food, I followed the GPS directions, which took me further and further away from the main roads. The streetlights became fewer and fewer until I was driving down a completely dark, narrow road surrounded by trees. I started to feel uneasy, but I told myself it was just my imagination. The GPS eventually led me to a small dirt road with a single house at the end. The house looked old and run down, with no lights on inside or outside. I double-checked the address on the app, and it matched. I parked my car and left the headlights on so I could see where I was going. The overgrown grass brushed against my legs as I walked up to the porch. The house looked abandoned, but I knocked on the door anyway. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, and sent a message to the customer through the app, letting them know I was at the door. A few seconds later, I got a reply. "I'm coming. Give me a minute." I waited on the porch, glancing around nervously. The silence was deafening, and the only sound was the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. After a couple of minutes, I messaged the customer again, asking if they could confirm the address. They replied, "You're at the right place. I see you." That message sent a chill down my spine. I looked around, shining my phone's flashlight into the darkness, but I didn't see anyone. I decided to leave the food on the porch and get out of there. As I turned to walk back to my car, I heard a voice from the darkness behind me. "Over here," it said, low and raspy. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I shone my flashlight in the direction of the voice, but I couldn't see anyone. "I'm leaving the food here," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. I started walking quickly back to my car, but the uneasy feeling in my gut was growing stronger. When I reached my car, I noticed something was wrong. The car was leaning slightly to one side. I checked and saw that both tires on the driver's side were completely flat. My stomach dropped. I ran to the other side and saw that the other two tires were slashed as well. Panic set in as I realized I was stranded. I got into the car and locked the doors, trying to think of what to do. That's when I saw movement in the corner of my eye. I turned and saw someone standing just outside my driver's side window, wearing a mask. I screamed and fumbled to start the car, but with all four tires flat, I wasn't going anywhere. Then I noticed more figures emerging from the darkness. There were at least 3 of them, all wearing masks, surrounding my car. One of them banged on the window and yelled, "Get out of the car!" I was shaking so badly I could barely think. I yelled back, asking what they wanted, and one of them replied, "Just give us everything, and we'll let you go." I didn't have much of a choice. I unlocked the door, and as soon as I did, one of them yanked it open and dragged me out. They pushed me to the ground and started kicking me. I tried to shield myself, but there were too many of them. They took my wallet, my phone, my watch, and even my shoes. One of them rummaged through my car, taking anything of value. After what felt like an eternity, they ran off into the woods, leaving me lying on the ground, bruised and terrified. I don't know how long I lay there before I managed to get up. My whole body hurt, and I was shaking uncontrollably. I started walking down the road, hoping to find help. After what felt like forever, I saw a faint light in the distance. It was a small house with a porch light on. I stumbled up to the door and knocked frantically. A man answered, and I quickly explained what had happened. He let me use his phone to call the police and a tow truck. The police arrived about 20 minutes later and took my statement. They checked the house where the delivery was supposed to go and confirmed it was vacant. The customer account used to place the order was fake, and the phone number was untraceable. The whole thing had been a setup. My car was towed, and I had to call a friend to pick me up and take me home. The experience left me shaken for weeks. I stopped doing deliveries at night and became much more cautious about where I accepted orders. It was a hard lesson, but one I'll never forget.